Three Religious Rebels, Chapter 11. This chapter is entitled Sunset and Evening Star. It had been scorchingly hot all morning, and even now, in the late afternoon, the monks found no breath of air stirring through the woods, nor any relief from the heat and the shade. It had showered during the night, and the sun was still drawing up from the earth in oppressive humidity. Stephen and Alberic were soaked in sweat as they directed the work of drainage. The swamp was wide and fairly deep, but the long channels had been well dug. A few more feet now, and they would be into the swamp itself. Then that polluting stagnancy would slide down to the boisterous waters of the mountain stream and be carried off first to the river, then to the sea. It was Odo who made the last cut. As the ooze and slime slowly tumbled over the lip of the channel, he lifted his great round face, which was red as fire, and smiled at Alberic. The prior returned that smile, plunged his tool into the mouth of the channel, deepening its throat and widening its lip. Then he motioned to the puffing Odo to rest. He watched the flow of the squalid stuff a moment, then clapped his hands as a signal for all to cease working. Stephen came alongside the prior and pointed to a patch of pond lilies well out on the bosom of the swamp. Their beautiful pink and white blooms were resting on broad leaves. "You can have splendor even in a cesspool, can't you?" he said. Alberic's eyes twinkled as he turned from the flowers. "That sight gives me hope, Stephen," he said. "If God can work wonders in this swamp, there may be a few white petals on my soul some day." "Such presumption," said a voice behind them. The two monks turned. "Oh, Reverend Father, I didn't hear you." "But I heard you," laughed the abbot. After a swift glance at the swamp and the channels, he said, "That will drain nicely. Now, Father Prior, I hope you are not too tired, for there is work to be done. And Duke Odo tells me he must leave us soon. Will you take all except Father Stephen to that field we cut yesterday and gather in the hay? I'm sure it is dry after this morning's sun, and I'm afraid we are in for another shower very shortly. Leave your spade here. I'll stay with Father Stephen and keep this stuff flowing." Some time after the prior and duke had gone, Stephen roused himself from a reverie and dreamily asked, "I wonder how long it will be before this wilderness becomes a thriving city of God." The abbot made no answer for what seemed to Stephen a very long time. When he did speak, his tone was that of one in deep meditation. "If I said soon, you might misunderstand me. But the true answer is soon." Resting lightly on the long handle of his spade, he turned to Stephen and said in a more lively tone, "It was only this morning at prayer that I saw how quickly time flies. I'm over 80 years of age, Stephen. I've been a monk for all of 66 years. Would you believe me were I to tell you that it seems a very short while ago that I left home to enter St. Pierre de la Salle?" Stephen stepped forward and dug away some mud and some gummy green that threatened to stop up the mouth of the channel. When he had freed the opening, he stepped back and said, "I suppose you've been so busy the time slipped by unnoticed. Just think of all you've accomplished. Troyes, Tonnerre, Cologne, Moulins, Citeaux." "How can you speak of accomplishment, my son?" asked the abbot quickly. "All day long I've been continuing my morning's meditation, and all I can see is a series of failures." "Failures?" asked Stephen. "Certainly, son," said Robert quietly. "Over 65 years ago, I was seized with one ambition. I dreamed of bringing men back to the strict observance of the rule, so that by it they might show gallantry to God. You see how much of that dream has come true. You see how well that ambition has been realized. Here we are beside a swamp. A mere handful is down in the hayfield. And you talk of accomplishments? I failed at St. Pierre's. Even as prior, I effected nothing. Why, I even failed to convince my greatest friend. To say that I accomplished anything at Tonnerre is pure romancing. I don't want to say lying. The truth is that I had to resign from St. Michael's after 2 short but very turbulent years. I was a dismal failure. Was it you who failed, or the monks? Asked Stephen, as the old abbot paused. When a commander loses a battle, don't blame the troops. When a leader fails to inspire his followers, don't blame the followers. No, my kind and consoling friend, I failed at St. Michael's and I failed at Moulins. I failed all my life. It is only now that I have a semblance of what I first ambitioned. It is only today that I see a shadow of what I dreamed. The old man's gaze strayed out across the swamp. Of course, I can thank God that there has never been a soul failure. I have never lost faith. Mistakes there have been, malice never. But I still think I should have achieved more. More evident, objective successes for him. There has been no real negligence nor lack of energy. There has been lack of prudence, foresight, tact, and 101 other faults to which his mercy must be extended. But the point I was making, concluded the old man as he turned to Stephen, is that you cannot speak of triumphs in my long life. And the greater point is that my long life, and every long life, is frighteningly short. Stephen went across to the lower channel, which had become clogged by a tangle of roots and weeds catching on a bit of projecting rock. It took him some time to loosen the mess. When he came back to the abbot, he was streaming sweat. Robert made him sit down at the base of a tree and loosen the neck of his robe. He feared that the sub-prior had become overheated. But Stephen smiled his fears away and pointed through the tops of the trees, saying, God is going to cool me off in a moment. See that cloud? It's full of nice, cool water. It's going to break soon. He had just finished speaking when a streak of lightning stabbed down from the summer heavens. There was a rumble of thunder, then the woods rattled with the sound of heavy raindrops pelting the leaves. Robert sat down close to Stephen. He watched the dimpling of the surface of the swamp by the rain. Suddenly he swung his old head from side to side and sighed. Stephen looked at him. Ah, Stephen, wouldn't it be grand if we could be absorbed in God as those raindrops are absorbed in the waters of the swamp? See, you can't tell which was rain and which was swamp. They are one, and we. And again he sighed. You want heaven on earth, Reverend Father, laughed Stephen. It can't be. Paradise lies the other side of the mountain, and the road winds uphill all the way. What mountain? Asked Robert abruptly. Calvary, said Stephen, or if you will, the mountain of failure. Ah, then I have found my heaven on earth, exclaimed the abbot as he brushed a few raindrops from his face. For it seems as though I have climbed my mountain of failures and found, I almost said success, but I don't like that word. I'll say Citeaux. You are happy here, aren't you? Oh, Stephen, happy as a schoolboy on holiday. So happy that the 66 years seem like 66 yesterdays. This is a foretaste of heaven. Soon the rain stopped, and far down in the west, the sun broke through a group of gray and black clouds. "Look at that for glory," Robert cried, and pointed to the rich crimson and flaming gold. "That is my life and symbol, Stephen. God is granting me a glorious sunset after many showers. My sunset, too, is rich with rose and gold. I have seen Citeaux. I am now ready to sing my Nunc Dimittis." The sub-prior made no answer, but as they gathered their tools, he looked again to the west and saw that a cloud had closed in and covered the sun. He hoped this was no sinister foreshadowing of the close of the abbot's life. On the way home, Robert told Stephen more about his joy in Citeaux. The poverty of the place and the fewness of their number did not allow for the perfection of his plans, but the simplicity, solitude, austerity, the spirit of prayer, the zealous seeking after God, the sincerity of the community and its absolute unity delighted him. As they approached the gate of the monastery, they noticed a stranger. He had evidently just dismounted. Seeing the two monks, he came toward them, bowed reverently, and asked, "Are you Abbot of Malem?" Robert answered, "Of Citeaux." The messenger presented a small scroll. Robert unrolled it, read the few lines, and with trembling hands passed it to Stephen. The sub-prior ran his eye over the message. It was from Hugh, Archbishop of Lyon and Legate of the Holy See. He read on more anxiously. He gasped as he caught the message. It requested Robert to return to Malem for the good of all concerned. Stephen noted that it was a request, not a command. He stressed the fact to Robert. The old man said nothing, but eloquently pointed to the words, Papal Legate. Stephen understood. He knew that Rome did not have to command Robert. She had merely to request. To him, her voice was the voice of God. He watched the old man as he turned to the west with a wan smile. The sun had gone down. Piled on the far horizon were clouds, white, gray, purple, and black. Robert's hand went out in their direction. Sunset obscured, he said, my life and symbol. With a heavy heart, the old man turned to the monastery. A battle was going on within him. He did not waver, but his whole being seemed in revolt. Resignation to this was costing him more than anything had cost him in his long life. Go he certainly would, even though the going broke his heart. Rome had spoken, and go he did. A fortnight later, Alberic got full details. He learned that as soon as Robert and his 20 men had left Malem, history repeated itself. A year had not elapsed before the community was again in turmoil and had turned to Robert as the only possible relief. Dispatching 2 of their number to the Eternal City, they waited in great anxiety to learn the outcome of the mission. The 2 petitioners interrupted a council of Urban and caused endless commotion by their pleadings. The Pope was a Frenchman. He knew Malem and had heard much about Robert. He listened to these 2 with some impatience. To be rid of them more than anything else, he gave them a letter to his legate at Lyon, instructing the latter to look into the matter and make a final decision. When Alberic had told Stephen this, the Englishman said, "I should have thought that Hugh would stand by the official approbation he gave Robert less than 2 years ago." Alberic shrugged his shoulders. What could he do? The men of Malem claimed that spiritual as well as temporal ruin threatened their house. Undoubtedly, his sympathies were with Citeaux, but it is terrifying to think of a big monastery like Malem going to ruin. You notice that he did not command. I think that is significant. It was with reluctance that he even requested. Poor Robert, was all that Stephen said. But Robert did not need so much sympathy, for when he returned, this time he found a community that was thoroughly chastened. True, he could not lead them to his lifelong dream, the literal observance of the rule, but he did manage to have them show some gallantry. For a little over 10 years they so lived that they actually gladdened the heart that they had so nearly broken. But they did it just in time, for that giant heart would not beat for them much longer. In 1111, a light like the silver of the evening star broke over Melem. It slowly grew to tremendous portions and threw mighty rays in all directions. "What is this?" asked serfs in awe-filled whispers as they stopped to watch the heavenly rays spread farther and farther. Suddenly they heard the bells of the monastery tolling slowly, mournfully. Soon they learned the truth. The good Abbot Robert, who had burned on so long, had at last burned out. He had gone to God. A truly heartsick monk brought the news to Citeaux. So evidently exhausted was he from the journey that Ilbode, the guest master, insisted on his taking rest and refreshment before proceeding to see Stephen Harding, who was then abbot. The messenger had not strength enough to refuse, but begged his hospitable brother in religion to deliver immediately his charge, the official letter of announcement to the abbot. Ilbode complied promptly, surmising the sad contents of the letter from the face of its bearer. Stephen at once summoned the community to chapel and begged prayers for and to Robert. The bell at Citeaux tolled for the old abbot, spreading the news through the country around. Many remembered the great figure of the man who had first brought the monks to Citeaux, and who had so won the loyalty of Odo, their duke. Later in the day, Stephen requested that the messenger come to his room as if he were now strong enough. For the abbot was anxiously waiting word of the last days of his beloved superior. The visitor followed Ilbode willingly enough to the abbot's room, but once there stood hesitantly at the door. Stephen approached to greet him warmly, but paused, wondering at the fixed, yet somehow pleading gaze with which the other was watching him. "You, who know men so well, do not remember me, Abbot Stephen?" asked the stranger. At the sound of his voice, Stephen's usually mild face hardened in spite of himself. He turned and walked back to his desk. "Yes," he said finally, "I do remember. Come in, Romanus." Stephen sat in silence a moment, regaining his somewhat shaken composure. As far as personal feeling went, he had long been forgiven. He had before forgiven Romanus. He had heard that in later years the man had become one of the most exemplary of Robert's followers at Melem. Many told how he had used his persuasiveness to increase the understanding of his brothers for their abbot. But involuntarily, Stephen's mind still held the two pictures, of Robert praying in tears for his callous monks, of Alberic lying humiliated and beaten on the floor at Melem. At last he looked up, praying to be neither uncharitable nor hypocritical. The expression on Romanus's face surprised Stephen. It showed such comprehension of the struggle that had been going on in his mind. The abbot nodded, as if admitting that his unspoken thoughts had been heard. "Reverend Father," said the monk, "I came here not to trouble you, but from a desire to do a small service for our abbot. I knew from the love he had for you and all at Citeaux that I could not please him better than by bringing you the news as soon as possible. For this reason I begged permission to act as messenger." Stephen softened. This Romanus, who wished to be of service, was another person from the brilliant, somewhat self-centered logician he remembered in other days. He relaxed and sat back in his chair. "Tell me about our Father Abbot," he asked. Romanus, who had grown close to the old monk, was able to tell Stephen many of the details he longed to hear. of the more comforting last years, of the peaceful death, of the miraculous star. I wonder, will the world ever understand him, mused Stephen when Romanus had ended. I doubt it, replied the other. Why? Stephen was surprised at the decision in Romanus's tone. Most people look only at the surface, as I did once. They see the superficial contradictions, as I did. And to justify themselves before others, they prefer to ignore what they will not try to rival. Surely you know of the sneers that are still being heaped on Robert. For a long time he was accused of stubbornness. Now they have changed it to fickleness. I heard of this last charge, said Stephen. Imagine Archbishop Hugh making even casually such a comment as Robert's wanted fickleness. How could he apply such a word to such a man? He should know beyond all others that every act of Robert's religious life was done in obedience to his superiors. Tonnerre, Troyes, Collin, Molem, Citeaux, practically every change was made at the will of the Holy See. True, said Romanus, but you must remember that the Archbishop probably did not bother to inquire into the marvel of Robert's obedience. He never understood why our abbot went so meekly from place to place. Then, too, the Archbishop must have known something of Robert's ideal, and when he saw him peacefully agree to leave Citeaux, the one place where the ideal had any chance of being realized, he sneered. He never knew it almost tore Robert's heart out to leave Citeaux. He left so quietly that even I did not realize how much it meant to him, said Stephen. But his first letter back to us made me weep to read it. After all these years, I can remember some of the exact words. I would sadden you too much if I could use my tongue as pen, my tears as ink, and my heart as paper. I am here in body because obedience demands it, but my soul is with you. Romanus was silent. At last he said, I was one of the most active in begging for Robert's return. How ashamed I was when I saw what our weakness had cost him. And now to hear him sneered at for his sacrifice, and his voice trailed off. Robert never minded sneers, said Stephen, who did not wish Romanus to blame himself too severely. And at any rate, we need not worry over Robert now. He is with God, and God is sure to vindicate him. Indeed, Romanus, from what you have said of Robert's death, God has begun his work already. That light over Molem tells a story. Yes, replied Romanus thoughtfully, it does. Robert is undoubtedly one of God's saints. But Abbot Stephen, to me, and to all of us who doubted, Robert's miracle of miracles is you, Citeaux. The triumph of his generous love of God is here, in your lives. Stephen leaned over and clasped the hand of the monk opposite him. There are miracles of all kinds, he said, and I think Robert must be especially happy in the birth of his new brother Romanus.